Welcome back to another episode of Your English Plus. This is Sergi. In this episode, let's see if we can shed some light on what it means to talk about the mood of the verb. Now, mood is one of the four kinds of indicators or aspects of the verb, ways in which we can talk about the verb. The other three are tense. Tense tells you about when something happens, so present, past, or future. And we also have aspect that tells you a little bit about the duration over time or the way the action extends over time, if it was finished or continued or something like that. And then the last one is voice, and that tells you if the action is active or passive. Now, mood is a little bit different from this because what mood tells you about is the speaker's attitude towards what is being described. So, the attitude. Let's see if we can make some sense of this. We'll start with the indicative. So, we have three moods here in English. We have imperative, the indicative, and the subjunctive. The indicative is all about being fairly sure or confident in what you are describing. And that's why a lot of times with indicative, you're describing facts. So an example would be something like, he kicks the ball. Okay, he kicks the ball. That's our example here. This is a fact and I can observe it. So a lot of times, the indicative is being used for things that you can describe, that you can see, that you are going on, that are true. You don't have to physically see them, but they are true in the larger world out there. The other thing that you can use the indicative for is for questions. So you can ask questions with the indicative as well. You could say something like, did he pay? And here we have a helping verb, did, and we have the regular verb and the question mark. And we say, did he pay? So that's also indicative. Then we have the imperative. The imperative is all about commanding. All about commanding people to do things. In fact, I would say that imperative is the easiest one to remember because it's fairly straightforward. You just gotta request something or command something. You could say something like, pass the ball. Let's say you're playing a sports here. You say, pass the ball! Exclamation mark. And then, pass is a verb and pass is an imperative mode. So if we go back to our sense of attitude then, if the indicative is about being confident that something is a fact, even in a question, you're still expressing the same way, then the imperative is always, or it's about desiring something. Imperative is about desiring something, it's about desire, it's about wanting something, it's about demanding. That's your attitude. Your attitude towards the action. Then the last one is the subjunctive. And this one is the hardest. And it is hard to describe the mood here. I suppose you could say the mood is a little bit more speculative. Maybe that's a good word for it, because what the subjunctive typically refers to is action or states of being when it comes to verb that are more hypothetical. These are often more hypothetical and they may in fact be conditions contrary to fact. Contrary to fact, or at least not known to be fact. We don't know yet if these are facts. So the substitute, or the subjunctive should say, then is more kind of hypothetical type of mood. Let's zoom into a little bit more and give you a little example. And I really should treat the subjunctive separately in a different video, because it's quite really tricky. So as I mentioned, oh, did I mention this? No, I didn't mention this. Okay. The subjunctive is often replaced by modal auxiliaries. So it is replaced in English often by modals. A couple of examples would be should or could. You can see in there already that sense of hypothetical. You should do this. It's not necessarily something you are doing. It's not indicative. You're not describing something that's happening. But it's more hypothetical, contrary to fact kind of action. You should do this, and you might do this, or you may do this. These are also more subjunctive hypothetical states. Now, let me give you a couple examples then of where you can actually see this in practice. The first one here is with I. So let's say if I were sick, and you finish this, you could say with I would binge watch TV all day, or something like that. But if you start with I, if I were sick, then where is the subjunctive? It's not was. Was would be indicative, but it's where. It's a hypothetical statement. If this were the case, and then that's where sometimes people are not familiar with. They make this mistake, whereas native speakers tend to know intuitively that they're supposed to use where. But the reason is because where is subjunctive. Here's another example, and this one you may not be familiar with. So let's say you write, or you say, I suggested that he heed my advice. So you can see here that heed is not heeds. If this was indicative, you would say he heeds, but heed here is subjunctive. It's missing that S. That's how you can tell, and that's because the second clause, that he heed my advice, this is not actually fact, but it's something I am suggesting. It's a condition contrary to fact. It's a hypothetical situation, and it may or may not happen. To summarize then, we have this three moods: the imperative, the indicative, and the subjunctive. The indicative and the imperative are very common, and subjunctive is increasingly rare. You could actually ignore it to a certain extent, but you will see it still show up in certain instances. With one example here, let's say God help us. This is subjunctive because in indicative it would be God helps us. But this is more of a hypothetical, contrary to fact statement. It's a statement about what we would like to happen. So yeah, that's it for the mood of the verb. So if you guys have questions, please do ask your respective teachers about this topic. This has been Sir G, and I'll see you on next episodes.